Hey folks, Dr. Mike here for Renaissance Periodization, tackling a very, very common, very controversial question today. Should you train for strength if your goal ultimately is maximum muscle size? Should you train for strength to get bigger? Very, very interesting. Let's take a look at why maybe the answer is a yes, why maybe the answer is a no, and find some middle ground with some really good solid recommendations. So, when we say train for strength, we really mean training for what in sports science is called basic strength, sets of roughly 3 to 6 repetitions to try to increase the amount of load you can do for sets of 3 to 6 repetitions. Maybe that's good for hypertrophy. Let's find out how. First point, sets of 5 to 8 reps, which is often used in strength training, and sets of 5 to 6 are right in that range, and sets 7 and 8 still gets you some good strength results, are very hypertrophic, especially for faster twitch fibers. So if you're training some faster twitch muscles like the hamstrings, potentially the pecs and stuff like that, sets of 5 to 8 reps really do increase your strength in the basic strength range and are very, very good for muscle hypertrophy. So there's a very good interaction there. When you're doing a low volume maintenance phase to resensitize yourself for future hypertrophic gains, it's low volume and you can use high intensities and high loads. That's a really good time to do strength training. So if you want to take your low volume maintenance phase and use it as a strength mesocycle, that is totally good to go. All of a sudden, it fits right in. So far, so good. Next, people who've trained in strength a lot have really, really good technique on the compounds. Squats, benches, deadlifts, rows, pull-ups. Many former powerlifters who switch to some bodybuilding have excellent technique with excellent range of motion and unbelievable stability under heavy loads because they needed all those things and developed them with strength training. Look, if you take someone that's never really squatted very heavy before and you get them to do sets of 5 to 10 or 5 to 15 in the squat, they could have all sorts of weird technique breakdown. Their core could be the limiting factor. They don't know how to brace. You take a former powerlifter, they know how to squat and heavy. And all of a sudden you just increase the reps. Their technique is fucking awesome because they know how to handle themselves under heavy load. They know how to arch and retract in a bench press. They know how to brace properly in a deadlift and keep the bar close to their bodies. They're really just well-oiled machines in which you inject more volume, and all of a sudden they grow super great. Some of the easiest folks I've ever had the pleasure of training in hypertrophy are former or current powerlifters or weightlifters because they automatically know how to lift really, really well with a really stable technique. And because the loads are even lighter, their technique doesn't break down when they get to higher reps because they're used to having their technique attempted to be broken down by super heavy weights. If you've squatted a shitload of weight with really great technique in sets of 3 to 6, squatting with sets of 8, it's just a bit more work. It's not that tough. But if you had someone who's done a bunch of lunges, leg presses, and leg extensions, and now you have them squat in sets of 5 to 10, they could be a real clusterfuck. So a lot of times training for strength and having a background of strength on the compounds just makes you really good at training for higher volume hypertrophy work. In addition to that, strength training can make your core so strong that it's no longer the limiting factor and lets you train your target muscles better. For example, powerlifters, when you have them do bent over rows from deadlifts, their erector complex is so strong that the bent over rows are only going to train the pulling muscles and not the spinal erectors. Because the spinal erectors are so strong, there's no problem for them to keep you stable. But if you take someone who's just been doing pull-ups and pull-downs and machines, you have them do bent rows for the first time, and I've run into this training new bodybuilders, their erectors are so weak because they've never powerlifted before that they try to do bent rows and all of a sudden they're just rounding over and losing tension, and you're like, oh man, you're actually not strong enough to do bent rows. It's crazy, but true. You got to do some deadlifts first to get that core strength, then you can do bent rows. Same idea with squats. A strongman or a power lifter or a weightlifter, when they do squats, they're likely to be limited by their legs because their core is so strong, it's not a limiting factor. But for a bodybuilder who's used to doing leg extensions, leg press, and so on and so forth, you put them on the squat, they start folding over because their erectors and all of the core musculature, their abs just aren't strong enough, and they don't have the technique to go along with it. So strength training, in some sense, is very good for hypertrophy in the lower rep ranges for the faster twitch muscles, and it also prepares you. It's really good for low volume maintenance stuff, and it also seemingly prepares you really well for future hypertrophy gains more than it helps directly, but it sure as hell doesn't seem like it hurts. That's on the positive side. let's look at the negative side, why maybe not doing a lot of strength training is optimal for hypertrophy. First, direct growth from strength training is relatively low. Sets of 3 to 6 don't grow you all that much. And in fact, if you just go down to point number 3 there, anything under sets of 5 reps makes very little sense from direct hypertrophy, right? It doesn't cause a lot of muscle growth relative to how many sets you're doing, and it has a distinctly higher injury risk, and that's a big downside. When you're a bodybuilder and you're training for strength, you're getting stronger, core strength, resensitization, all those good things. When you got your 3RM loaded in the squat or the deadlift or the bench or the overhead press or something, and you got a show coming up in 16 weeks, you think to yourself, how much would an injury on this really hurt my career? The answer is like a lot. Now, if you're a powerlifter, a strongman, or a weightlifter, you have to train heavy anyway. So you say, okay, getting injured would suck for my career, but there's no way out of this. Like, I have to do it anyway, right? It's like saying a business trip takes a lot of time, but if your business is to go on business trips, you have to do it. But if you don't have to go on a business trip, why would you? Same way a bodybuilder has, okay, hypertrophy training to do. Strength training might be a benefit, but if strength training is much riskier for injury, which it is, then hypertrophy training, it just might not be worth it. And because the direct growth stimulus is so low, relatively speaking, to sets of 5 to 10, and especially 10 to 20 and 20 to 30, that just might not make a whole lot of sense to do it because the trade-offs are so nasty. Now, you may think, some people will say there's some kind of special growth advantage, right, to very heavy training. And people will say that. It's just not very likely that that's the case. People say things like, you only get traps like that by going heavy, right? Only powerlifters have traps like that. Well, a lot of really high-level bodybuilders have more impressive traps than powerlifters. A lot of them don't go super heavy, right? Are some muscle groups better heavy? Yeah. But less than sets of 6? Probably not, right? Sets of 3 to 6 are great and can cause good hypertrophy for your traps, for example, from deadlifting or shrugs. But sets of 5 to 10 are probably at least as good with lower fatigue. So it starts to not add up a ton when you're trying to cram strength training down hypertrophy training's throat, so to speak. Some more problems. You can alter your technique to lift the most weight, and that tends to reduce the stimulus to fatigue ratio on the actual target muscles you're trying to grow. So if you're squatting as much as you can, you position squat low bar, you sit back more, you open up your hips more. That doesn't grow the quads anymore. As a matter of fact, if you had a slightly closer stance, high bar position, and you let your knees come forward a lot with a very upright squat, you would actually grow your quads more for the fatigue that you're getting. So a lot of times people get really, really into strength and say strength, size, same thing, right? And they start benching with a huge arch. No problem with that for competitive powerlifting, but it's not the best stimulus to fatigue ratio way to get big pecs. They start to deadlift with a sumo stance, which it doesn't even train the back as much anymore, trains your adductors a lot. Most bodybuilders, that's not a problem because they do so much leg work out, the adductors are never a weakness. And then they'll do squats with a low bar position and sort of not even full range of motion anymore, just below parallel, which is great, but probably going deeper. It puts an extra stretch on the quads. And all of a sudden, they're chasing strength and they get some good size along with it. But if they were really interested in optimal size with a really great stimulus to fatigue ratio, they wouldn't train for strength a lot of times because the technique is so different. Lastly, there's a notion, it's the only way to describe it as a notion, that naturals need to get stronger and drug users, enhanced people, don't in order to gain size. To be like, well, metabolites and drop sets and volume, that all stuff works for drug users, but naturals need to get stronger on the basic lifts. That's the only way they put on size. I call this first-rate make-believe. Somebody just made that up and somebody else thought it made some sense and just kept repeating it. So first of all, drug users and non-drug users, fundamentally the hypertrophy pathways are identical. There are some slight differences in training application, but it's a fucking moot point. Second of all, if getting stronger in the right rep ranges, which we'll get to in a second, wasn't what grew the people that use drugs the most, how the hell come all the drug users benching inclines with the 180s? Okay, Ronnie Coleman's out there deadlifting 800 pounds. Everyone's using these crazy heavy weights for higher reps. That maybe you should have told them that if they just do tons of submaximal volume and drop sets, they'll get just as big. Why do you think bodybuilders beat themselves up with super crazy weights? Because fundamentally, everyone needs to get stronger in the right rep range. That applies to naturals just as well as it does in enhanced individuals. There's some data to indicate that if you're enhanced, maybe your slower twitch fibers grow a little bit better relative to your faster twitch fibers, maybe, and that higher rep training can be a little bit more beneficial for you than average. But as we'll see in the next slide, that still means you need to get stronger in the higher rep ranges. That doesn't take you away. So the idea that naturals should train for strength, but really train for strength. And it's really for, if you're natural, training for strength is really, really awesome and a really big part of hypertrophy, much more so than for enhanced people. That's just not true. Somebody made that up. And I think a lot of the reason people made that up is because a lot of naturals do both powerlifting and bodybuilding, and they sort of want to, I don't want to say pretend, they sort of want there to be more concordance between those two things than there really are. And there's a lot, but there's limits to that sort of thing. Okay, taking all that in, we've got some good reasons to use strength training for hypertrophy, and we've got some reasons why maybe it's not a good idea. Where do we go from here? Well, here's the deal. At the end of the day, you're going to spend the vast majority of your time as a hypertrophy trainee in the 5 to 30 rep range. Okay, under 5, not really a good idea. Because, yeah, you can get stronger in the 5 to 10 rep range, and that's really pretty close to basic strength. But as long as when you start training sets of 4, 3, 2, and 1, the trade-offs are just usually too big, and the direct benefit is usually too small. Now, training hard in the 5 to 30 rep range will make you stronger across the whole 5 to 30 rep range. So here's the deal. A lot of folks, when they see this presentation title, should you train for strength to get bigger, will be like, well, of course, you need to get stronger in the rep ranges you're training. Yes. But specifically in sports science, training for strength and how a lot of people colloquially understand strength training is like training for sets of 3 to 6. For that, not as much. But everywhere in this 5 to 30 rep range, you should be getting stronger over time. Your best set of 25, your best set of 10, your best set of 5 should always be on average every mesocycle or every block going up and up and up and up. So you should be training to get stronger, but that's not exactly the same thing as training for basic strength in sports science. And for sure not, because we're leaving the concept out, there's a concept called limit strength or max strength. That's training in 1RM. That has even more downsides than training for basic strength. But very few people are saying, like, you need to do a lot of 1RMs to get jacked. And if they are, they're really fucking wrong, and there's not much to say about that. Here's the thing. Strength is a great size indicator. More than it progresses size, it's an indicator that you're getting bigger, because bigger muscles can produce more force. If your muscles have grown, what they used to do for sets of 20 is now they can do for sets of 25. And the new sets of 20 is more weight. So if you're gaining meso to meso, and especially block to block in the 5 to 30 rep range, you're gaining strength. That's awesome. You're probably gaining size. If you're not gaining strength, if you take this too far and go, look, bro, Dr. Mike said strength and size training is totally fucking different, and I don't have to do any strength training. And someone's like, hey, like, how's your bent row? Has it been going up over time? You're like, didn't you hear what I said, bro? Dr. Mike says strength training is irrelevant. Doesn't matter how strong you are. All that matters is your feel. Get the fuck out of here with that shit. You should be gaining strength over time. What do? You focus on great technique in the hypertrophy movements, and you push hard in the 5 to 30 rep range for multiple sets. And you let your rising strength over time tell you that you're gaining muscle. And if your strength is not rising over time, either not trying hard enough or something is woefully wrong and you're not actually getting more jacked. Give that some thought. Folks, thanks for tuning in. See you next time.